Hello, hi. Hi. My name is Stella Nyanzi, and I'm delighted once again to be in this space doing this live video. Yesterday, I promised that I would be making a live video every day uh, because I believe it's important to raise my voice. My phone was confiscated by the Polizei in Germany after I took evidence. I recorded 3 security guards who were in the process of verbally assaulting me, and they called the police on me. They assaulted me because I raised questions about the safety and the dignity of Akenke, a young Ugandan asylum seeker, and I asked why she was assigned to a room with a man that she doesn't know and did not consent to live with. When she objected to staying with that man, she was then assigned to a room with a stranger who is a woman, and the room had 1 bed, 1 mattress, 1 blanket. At the time I went to the living accommodation, which was yesterday, Akenke had been there for 3 days and 3 nights, and she'd been crying about the unfairness of what was happening. And so I have decided to begin by raising the rose flower, which I introduced yesterday. Akenke, my Ugandan friend, gave me this rose flower as a Mother's Day gift. So she's a young lady who is much younger than I am and would probably qualify to be my daughter. And so today I have been thinking a lot about Ugandan asylum seekers, and part of what I did just to focus myself and refocus my thoughts around asylum seekers, young Ugandans who have left Uganda, fled because of different forms of persecution, to refocus my thinking around Akenke's rights. I wrote a poster for myself. And people who watched this video yesterday did not see that sign that says Ugandan asylum seekers' lives matter. Duh. But I spent the whole of yesterday just calming myself. And I took off about 30 minutes today to write for myself a reminder and put it on my wall just behind my reading desk, my study desk, to remind me that Ugandan asylum seekers' lives matter. And part of the problem that I have realized is when I began to speak out yesterday, I was confronted with a lot of criticism. And Ugandans who responded to me either by inbox or in the comments or on my Twitter space or on my YouTube channel, where I have shared my different productions around yesterday's dehumanizing experience, they say to me, Stella Nyanzi, you cannot afford to be raising your voice in Germany. You have just gotten to Germany. Why are you asking questions of the German protection system? Why are you making noise for us? Why are you disturbing your children's newfound peace and freedom and settlement? In fact, this morning when I told my sons, my twin sons who are at home with me now, I explained to them what happened yesterday, and they said, but Mama, do you have to keep on asking questions around human rights violations of people who are not even concerned uh, about your own rights and well-being? Do you have to keep on asking questions on behalf of other people who are not even our relatives? Do you have to keep on asking questions around injustices? Why can't you keep quiet, Mama? And one of my sons, one of the twins, said to me, Mama Stella, please, for our own sake, avoid the topic. Avoid this topic. Avoid human rights activism. And I thought about it. But my heart is not settled. How can one of us have a problem and the rest of us continue living as if we don't notice, as if we don't see, as if she's not one of us? How can a Ugandan asylum seeker be facing deep injustices and the other Ugandan asylum seekers in her building, in her city, in the country which she's living, pretend that they don't realize? How can all of us be silent around the injustices that different people who have been forced to flee from their countries are facing? And so part of what I am doing with these live recordings is to raise the important questions. And today I want to ask seriously about who is interested in the welfare and well-being of Ugandan asylum seekers who are living in Germany, who are living in Munich. Many people don't realize that in the German system, uh, asylum seekers are allocated federal states or cities depending on their country of origin. And so Bavaria, whose capital is Munich, or people who play football know about Bayern München, um, that area, that federal state Bayern, Bavaria in English, is the one to which Ugandan asylum seekers, once they enter the system, are assigned. So it doesn't matter if a Ugandan applies for asylum in Berlin or in Hamburg or in Nuremberg, they will be sent to Bavaria, and many of them are allocated accommodation in different spaces all over the Bavarian federal state, some of them going to München or Munich, the city. I think the bulk of Ugandan asylum seekers in Germany are based in Munich until they have received their refugee status, and then they can move on to accommodation elsewhere. And so I was wondering, how can one Ugandan asylum seeker be faced with such structural and systemic violence, and all of us are silent? I wondered why, when I went to the accommodation yesterday, many other young Ugandan asylum seekers who are living in the same structure, the same building, came and spoke to me on the side, came and whispered to me on the side, but none of them was willing to stand with me when I was challenging the security guards, and later when I was speaking to the police officers. In fact, almost all the asylum seekers in this facility ran away from the space when the police arrived. In other words, we carry baggage from home. Many Ugandan asylum seekers who are living in spaces in countries that are new to us bring the same phobia or fear that we have of the Ugandan police forces back home, who harass anyone who is deemed to be outside the law, or anyone who is deemed to be critical or in opposition to the government and regime. I want to say that in my experience with the German police, often it has been a cordial and respectful experience, although I have had several other stories since yesterday from Ugandan refugees and Ugandan asylum seekers who attest or who give testimony to experiencing racism and violence from German police officers. So part of the problem around the silence and part of the fear that Ugandan asylum seekers bring to their asylum processes is this baggage that comes from home. Is this baggage that comes from home that very many people, in fact, yes, Otto Helena, thank you for raising that point. Very many people are afraid of the police in Germany because of the fears that we bring when we take that the plane. When we get onto the plane, we carry that baggage of what the Uganda police force officers do to ordinary citizens. And so in terms of speaking up and challenging human rights violations, challenging abuses, challenging even crimes that are stipulated in the law, obvious blatant crimes, many Ugandan asylum seekers are very hesitant and fearful to approach the police because of that fear. I think the second reason, which I have sort of zeroed down on based on my experience yesterday, is okweguya. Okweguya is the deep desire and longing to be processed quickly, to be processed and be successful in the application for refugee status, for asylum, for citizenship, for resettlement even. This deep desire causes many people who are victims of systemic and structural violence by state actors, right? It causes them to keep quiet and not raise their voices because they are afraid of entering the criminal process and the implications that may have on their process and application claims in places in countries such as Germany. And I want to share the experience of a young lady, Martha, who came up to me yesterday and said, "Hey, Mama Stella, aren't you scared? Aren't you scared of your name going into the police statement? Aren't you scared of what it means for you and your children in Germany? Aren't you scared that you will not be, your residence permit will not be renewed? Aren't you scared?" And she said to me, "Why don't you think about your children?" Martha said to me, "It is better to keep quiet until your process has been worked through." But Martha is the very same person who had told me about failing to obtain adequate and appropriate health care. She needs to see a gynecologist, and she still failed while she is waiting to be processed. And waiting for the outcome. And so I think for me that the fear to engage with the structures, especially when one has been victimized, the fear of entering the police records, the fear of, people are walking on eggshells in asylum because they think anything that happens and you engage with the law and order systems means that you're automatically going to lose in your application and you will be deported. And I want to say that the third issue I think that causes fear and why asylum seekers sit silently with dehumanizing systemic and structural violences is because there's been a spike, at least in Germany, but I've heard about Denmark and I'm now hearing about England. There's been a spike in the number of deportations of asylum applicants who are not successful. And I've lost some friends who unfortunately were forced to go back home. They were put on planes and returned home in shame, often with nothing, having spent up to 2 years waiting to be processed, some having spent 7 months. And so the period of wait and then the deportation thereafter has a chilling effect on these other ones who are in the process and being processed. The fear of deportation means that many asylum seekers from Uganda are going to sit with dehumanizing experiences that could actually be challenged, that could actually be improved, that could be worked on, that could be shifted and changed, right? We can engage with reasons why asylum seekers from Uganda are being deported. That's another issue. What I want to focus on today is why. Why aren't asylum seekers from Uganda, whose rights that are supposed to be protected, why aren't they raising their voices when these same rights are being violated? Not by private people, not by friends, not by street people walking on the streets, but by state actors, by workers employed within the refugee and asylum processes to protect and give safe custody to these people as they're waiting to either get refugee status or hear whatever other outcome there is. Why is it that we are unable to raise our voices and challenge this systemic violation, these structural abuses that are happening and taking away our human rights? I want to say that for me, I have never been silent, especially when faced with human rights violations. I have never been silent. The minute someone says to me, this is what I'm going through, and I establish harm and injury, especially that which is systemic or structural, that which is a departure from the provisions of protection, that which is an irregularity or blatant oversight by managers who are supposed to manage these processes, I cannot keep quiet. And so my friends who have been writing to me and say, Stella, think about your children. Stella, think about your life. Stella, think about the sort of huge animal you're going to engage with. Please stop silencing me. Please stop telling me to stop talking about Ugandan asylum seekers' lives mattering. Because you know what? If I don't speak now, my children are going to encounter the very same systemic violations, the very same structural injustices. And so every time I'm reminded about my children's future in Europe, my children's future in this world, and that reason is used as a reminder that should therefore silence me. Don't confront those in power. Don't confront human rights violators because they have the power to deport you or to deport your children. Excuse me. Because I want a good life for my children, because I want human dignity for my children, because I want the respect, the recognition of the equality of my children as human beings in the world, anywhere in the world, I cannot keep quiet. When I encounter systemic violence, when I encounter structural abuse of minorities, asylum seekers are among the most oppressed people anywhere in any part of the world. Refugees may be in a better position because they have then obtained the protection of the country in which they are living, having fled from home. Asylum seekers live a terrible predicament. And so to say to me, Stella, keep quiet, having encountered failures by protection staff, by humanitarian staff, by security guards who are supposed to ensure the dignity of a young Ugandan asylum seeker, I cannot keep quiet. Stop silencing me. If I'm deported back to Uganda because I raised my voice to challenge structural abuse of a young Ugandan asylum seeker, let me be deported. Deport me if that is what it's going to take to silence me, but I'm not going to keep quiet. Even when I'm taken back to Uganda, I'll continue raising my voice about the systemic injustices I have observed happening in the asylum process in Germany. So I have addressed that issue around silence. Please stop disturbing me. Stop sending me your DMs and your inbox messages and emailing me. Thankfully, I don't have a telephone. I cannot get your WhatsApp messages telling me, Stella, leave it alone. I'm not leaving it alone. How can I live with myself when I've observed the dehumanization of a young woman who's old enough to be my daughter or young enough to be my daughter? If one person's human rights are violated, all of us should be concerned. If one person's life is threatened, all of us should be concerned. Why is it that I'm the only person who's raising my voice? In that building yesterday, there were at least 20 people who came to the scene, who passed by the scene, who heard me speak. And when the police arrived, they all took off. Apart from my friend Solomon and another friend, Kay, who came to sort of engage with the security guards and also engage with the police. Why is it that we are so indifferent to the suffering of other human beings? They could have raised their voices. They could have rendered support, but they all chose to keep quiet. And I think the problem is that many asylum seekers do not recognize our human rights. Human rights are non-negotiable. They are non-derogable. They are inalienable. They are God-given. You don't wake up in the morning and a person gives you these rights, we are born with them. No one can take them away from us. Sometimes dictators and oppressors and authoritarian militant regimes, such as the dictatorship in Uganda, infringe upon our human rights. Sometimes because of historical issues, our rights are taken away from us, especially if we are minorities. That is why we must raise our voices and stand in solidarity and demand that as long as we be wherever we are, human rights are observed, human rights are recognized and protected, that they are fulfilled, especially by structures put in place to protect the rights of minority groups. One of the things that is interesting for me whenever I'm in a situation is to understand what are the laws that govern this particular situation. When I was running away from Uganda, I first went to Kenya as an asylum seeker with my children. When the asylum processes in Kenya failed, I went back to Uganda, and then I received the opportunity to come and live in exile in Germany. Last month, or maybe 2 weeks ago, the president of Uganda and the minister of foreign affairs issued a statement to all embassies telling ambassadors to challenge asylum claims of Ugandans based on political persecution, based on other forms where they are showing the Ugandan government in a bad light. And I want to say that that is a violation of our human rights that are protected by the 1951 Refugee Convention. All refugees are protected by the 1951 Convention. In fact, I think it has a 1967 protocol, right? So when I was entering the process of fleeing from Uganda and entering protection as an exiled scholar, an exiled writer, I took time to read the 1951 Refugee Convention and its protocol of 1967. I took time to understand when it was assented to by Uganda, my home country. That was 2 years, 1976, after I was born. I was born in 1974. In 1976, Uganda, under dictator Idi Amin, assented to the 1967 protocol of the 1951 Refugee Convention. Therefore, the country from which I come recognizes the 1951 Refugee Convention. So Yoweri Museveni, his dictatorship, his ministers, his police, and those NRM apologists, such as Calvin Kayanja, who wrote a letter to the Canadian government calling out asylum seekers from Uganda and saying they must be deported because they are pretending and making false claims. Shame on you, Calvin Kayanja. You do not know about the 1951 Refugee Convention and its 1967 protocol. Shame on you. Anybody who is telling asylum seekers, from Uganda especially, that we have no right to leave our country and seek for protection, shame on you. Shame on you, dictator Yoweri Museveni. Shame on all the ministers who are flaunting this propaganda. And shame on you, NRM propagandists, such as that Kayang boy in Canada, who is writing letters and sharing them shamelessly on Facebook and sending them to Canadian government officials and naming several Ugandan asylum seekers in Canada and demanding that they be deported because there are no human rights violations in Uganda. There is no torture of dissidents or opposition members. There is no sexual and gender minority abuse, even in the face of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, which the whole world knows about. So having established that refugees are protected, asylum seekers are protected, fleeing from situations of political persecution, especially by state actors, people who are working on behalf of the regime, a dictatorial regime such as Uganda. It is our right, it is our duty to flee for our lives, and every country that has either ratified or assented to or is a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention has committed to receive asylum seekers, process them as refugees in that country, or further process them for resettlement into a third country. Nobody should take this right away from us. And when we are in processes of being, our status is being determined, I want to explain very simply that many times the evidence we provide is interrogated and our stories are looked through, examined, assessed for consistency. Many times the embassies back home from which we come report regularly, sometimes every quarter, so quarterly, every 4 months, every 3 months, or sometimes monthly. Embassies send country human rights reports back to Germany, to Canada, to the UK, to those countries, their mother countries, reporting on the human rights violations. So Uganda cannot therefore claim to be human rights free, human rights protecting, human rights fulfilling, when there are reports that are coming from the ground, taken, sent to the mother countries by embassy staff who are recording what happens. Universal peer review mechanisms also ensure that these countries that offer resettlement access the United Nations peer review, which focuses on country performance, regular country performance, where reports are sent. So, my dears, do not worry about, Mama Stella, if you start raising your voice, your protection will be taken away from you. Mama Stella, you're creating for us problems. I am not going to keep quiet. I am going to talk and talk and talk about the fact that Ugandan asylum seekers' lives matter. If indeed there is a UN Convention on Refugees that countries have signed and ratified and assented to. In fact, I had to look up Germany and Germany's status regarding the Refugee Convention of 1951. Interestingly, Germany is among the first 6 countries who are signatories to this convention. In terms of the history of the convention, I think that protection became necessary after the First World War because a number of people in Europe were displaced by that war, right? The Second World War saw an influx, an increase, a heightening of exodus, people departing because they were fleeing from torture, they were fleeing from war, they were fleeing from their lives, they were fleeing from political persecution, and there were clear indications that the people who were perpetrating the violence were state actors. And so the 1951 Refugee Convention arises from that moment when it was necessary for countries who are receiving these refugees who are displaced forcibly, it was necessary for them to make codes and agreements about how to protect the people they were receiving. And perhaps the very last point I want to say today is that although they are rights and human rights protections for asylum seekers, we also have obligations. We have obligations and duties to know the law of the land in which we live and to abide by them. Tomorrow, I'm going to be tackling a different issue, as I promised, to honor the young woman whose name is Akeke, who's being dehumanized in the living cell, the living accommodation she was put up in. She was forced to live with a woman every day. I am going to make a Facebook Live calling out the German asylum system to put itself in order. To put itself in order, the German asylum system must put itself in order. I'm going to hold this rose until it dries up. And then I will get a fresh rose every evening, ever since my phone was taken by the police in Germany, because I recorded 3 security guards who were verbally assaulting me when I asked, Why is Ankeke sleeping in the same bed with a stranger in a protection house for asylum seekers coming from Uganda? They called me a lesbian. They alleged that all Ugandan women asylum seekers are lesbians. That is discrimination. That is homophobia. That is stigmatization. That is ostracization. That is labeling. And it is unacceptable. It is unacceptable, especially when it is perpetrated by security officers who are paid with taxpayers' money to protect and ensure safe custody of asylum seekers. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow. My name is Dr. Stella Nyanzi. Ugandan asylum seekers' lives matter. Duh.